Welcome to the Clark County League of Women Voters Primary Candidate Forum. This is the first time we've held them via Zoom, and it's also being recorded on CVTV.org. My name is Amy Ludholz, and I'm the moderator for this event. Jane Johnson is our timekeeper. We are both volunteers and members of the Clark County League of Women Voters. Thank you so much to all of our candidates for their participation in this event. The races covered in this recording are the 18th District State Senate seat and County Council District number 3. You'll see those job descriptions on the screen. Now, this was our first recording, so you'll forgive some technical difficulties that we experienced with CVTV. We were unable to capture the audio recordings for the candidates' opening statements, as well as their answers to question number 1. When the broadcast begins, you'll see their answers to question number 2. We did ask them to restate their answers to question number 1 at the end. Unfortunately, we did not revisit their opening statements. So in the spirit of transparency, we wanted to inform our audience of those challenges. We apologize for that missing information, but we hope you enjoy the answers to the questions. Okay, we're going to move on to question number 2. This year is the first to fully implement the results of I-940, formerly known as De-Escalate Washington, now Law Enforcement Training and Community Safety Act, LETCSA. How will you learn how well this is being implemented and what further legislation is needed? For this question, all candidates have an additional half minute to answer, a minute and a half total. And for this question, we're going to start with candidate Bell.
Sure. On this issue, I couldn't find any data on this, and that might be part of a problem, and that might be my failure. I had to look this up. But one of the keys to approach and understand how effective the initiative is and the subsequent legislation that updated it, you have to see the data. And what you're looking to see is, are there trends and disparities and anything to highlight where it shows that the officers who received the training, do they then demonstrate less instances of violent encounters with citizens and suspects? And so you would do the analysis from there. And overall, that steps back and lets me talk about the overall approach that you take to these challenges. If you take a public health approach to these challenges, there's a framework that it operates from, and it always fundamentally starts from data. And as a tech guy, I'm all about data. And so the overall approach is you analyze the data, track the trends and disparities, and then you look at the root causes that drive those disparities for those trends that you want to highlight. And then once you understand the root causes of those trends and disparities, what you're looking for is to start to see what solutions could you then put pilot programs out to test and see if they work in the real world. And then for those solutions, you then scale those up. In the startup game, that's called nail it and scale it. And that's what I would like to bring to the legislature. Thank you.
Candidate Lee?
Clearly, in this present time, our citizens are very, very concerned about law enforcement. And we absolutely must hold our law enforcement community to nothing but the highest standards. That having been said, we absolutely must ensure that there is adequate funding for them, because training is absolutely critical so that they know how to handle the multitude of situations that they encounter when they're out in our community. I spent over a decade in the military, and training was everything. We learned that we had to practice for any number of untold situations that we might encounter, and training was absolutely critical. I'm delighted that I had a nephew who served in the military in a law enforcement capacity, and he emphasized the absolute importance of training in every situation that they dictate. And that just reinforced the importance of training for our officers. We've got to hold them accountable, but we have to give them the tools that they need to train and be prepared to hold their actions to the highest standards and to deal with the needs of our law enforcement community. And at the end of the day, I think the average citizen is more than happy to support our law enforcement community and give them the tools they need. Thank you.
Okay, Candidate Rivers.
Thank you. So I have a perception, just like Candidate Bell, that we need data. We had a bill in the Senate this year that would actually force that data collection, but it didn't get out of committee. So we've resolved that we're going to make another run at that, and I'm so thrilled to hear that that's a priority for him too. As far as the training goes, it's my understanding that after 9/40, the Washington State Law Enforcement Training Commission has developed new protocols. But here's my primary concern. First of all, is I-940 being enforced? Is it enforceable? Is it being enforced? And I think the way that you get to find out how something is working is you have people at one big table. I've done, over or around 70 town halls, and I get to hear from folks across the spectrum. I get to hear from citizens. I get to hear from local elected officials. I get to hear from law enforcement folks. And all of those perspectives are important to listen to because they give us some idea of what's working, what needs to be tweaked. I've come away from my meetings. We have a committee at the state level in the Senate or in the legislature that looks at these issues, and here everyone is at the table. And what I've come away with is that the law enforcement officers want to have clear guidelines because they know that they don't want their profession tarnished by bad actors, and they don't want to ever see what happened in Minneapolis happen here in Washington. So
Candidate Rivers, we've got to, sorry, that's time. We're going to go ahead and move on to question 3. Okay. What are 3 specific legislative efforts you would introduce or support for the reevaluation of policing so it is more equitable and safe? If passed, what would they accomplish? And again, for this question, candidates have a minute and a half. We're going to start with Candidate Lee.
Thank you so much. That's a wonderfully important question right now. First and foremost, I'd love to see police in every one of our schools. We find that when we have personal, emotional interaction with people, we learn to trust them. And I'd love to see our children learn that they can trust our law enforcement community, and that these are honorable people, and that if they have issues, they can trust them and go to them, just like they learn to trust their teachers and their family. I'd also love to see an increase in funding for community policing. Again, our policemen need to be in the communities and closest to the businesses and the families for whom they are enforcing the laws. And again, the better relationship you have, the more you trust them. And by having police actually in the communities where they're enforcing the law, it helps everyone get along, and that ultimately delivers a much better product in better communities. Finally, I'd like to find a mechanism where we can reward our communities that have higher approval ratings for our police officers. If the people trust them, if they know them, the people know them best, and if their police are doing a great job, we ought to find some way, a financial incentive to say thank you for the great job and let them do it even more. And the communities that aren't doing quite as well can then follow the example of those being rewarded.
Thank you, Candidate Lee. We will move on to Candidate Rivers to answer second.
Thank you. I'll try to make it in time. So the first thing and most important thing is we need to capture that data and get that bill passed. And what that does is speaks for itself. The second thing is I think it is absolutely essential that we pass legislation that forbids, unless there are extreme circumstances, impeding an individual's airway in any way. Again, we simply cannot let another George Floyd event happen, and that's one way to make sure. And finally, I also am a proponent of community policing. I'm not a fan of defunding the police. I'm a fan of creating a parallel bucket that is spent on things like like a basketballcop.net. I don't know if you've seen that video, but those favorable touches where the police officers take time to develop relationships and then they develop trust and respect. And when you have that, they can be more like a friend than an authoritarian, militaristic type presence in someone's life. And I think that those things will pay immediate dividends, and they will move us down the road. People don't like extreme use of force, and the police, again, care deeply about their professional reputation, and they want to engage in these activities so that they can have a white hat firmly planted on their heads.
Thank you, Candidate Rivers. We will move next to Candidate Bell.
Hold on. Thank you. Thanks. I'm a father of a 5-year-old daughter, and I had to explain the killing of George Floyd to my daughter, and that wrecked me. And we live in a very interesting time. And by the way, that's a Chinese curse. But specifically, the way that we deal with this from the legislature is through the data. And like Senator Rivers said, it's about data. And that bill that Senator Rivers, I believe you're talking about, is HB 2789, about collecting information regarding the police use of deadly force. And it's about gathering that data and then tracking in the trends and disparities and having some factual analysis, and then taking sort of a public health framework approach to providing solutions and taking them to scale. Beyond that, I would expand the training initiated by I-940 to really focus on implicit bias, non-lethal uses of force, and de-escalation tactics that are already in there. But I think there's more work to do there. And then I would, for my own initiative, move towards not defunding the police, but maybe rethinking the police, and maybe augmenting the police with additional resources for social work and mental health. And maybe those resources could take the lead in unarmed situations, reduce instances of violence. The times we live in, we have to do something. We have to take it seriously. And we have to move forward. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, candidates. We're going to move right into question number 4. Is there a need for legislation to reduce jail and prison populations, and or to provide alternatives to punitive responses to crimes? If so, what are your ideas? If not, why not? And for this question, we're going to start with Candidate Rivers.
Thank you. So I just watched last night The 13th on Netflix. I totally recommend it because it was very eye-opening. But I think that what we have to do first and foremost is we have to try and educate people about keeping themselves out of jail. We need to look at what's happening systemically to put people in jail. And I'm not suggesting we don't put people in jail, but what I will say is I think the key is recidivism. We must prevent recidivism. So how do we do that? I think that we have to prepare people to be good citizens. I think that we've got to give them a place to go that keeps them off of the couch of a very bad influence who might suck them back into a lifestyle that got them in jail in the first place or prison in the first place. But also the other piece of it is we have to give them skills so that when they get out, they can get a job. And we need to strengthen our correctional agencies to help facilitate that, develop a bank of employers who will work with these folks.
Sorry, that's time.
With our disabled community.
Next up is Candidate Bell.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm all in favor of diversion approaches, especially for drug-related offenses that can map people to treatment rather than to jail and prison time. But our big focus needs to be on dismantling the school to prison pipeline, where we have failing schools that lead to dropouts, that lead to those kids engaging in criminal misbehavior. And we can see disparities, especially for Black and brown folks in these areas, but this all applies to all races. All kids in tough economic circumstances, they can get sucked into this bad pathway. and failing schools fail everybody. But to challenge part of this question, maybe I think that some people who do need to go to prison more are high-end financial crimes and corporate CEOs who commit malfeasance but just have to pay civil penalties. I would actually like to see more financial and high-end white-collar crimes lead to jail time. Thank you.
Thank you, Candidate Bell. And now we'll move into Candidate Lee.
Thank you. I agree with both of the other candidates and what they have shared with our community. But the honest answer here is if you don't want to go to jail, don't do the crimes. Let's look at the reality where we are not enforcing our current laws. Let's look at Seattle and Portland and at the sad laws.
But just have to pay civil penalties. I would actually like to see more.
Unbelievably bad. And the citizens are truly afraid. Their property is being destroyed. A whole host of things that are not right are happening there. And we need to support our law enforcement community, and we need to enforce current law. If you enforce current law, the communities are safer, people's businesses and their private property is protected. And bottom line, if we educate our children, if we give them a strong sense of right and wrong, they're not going to end up in jails. Thank you.
Thank you, candidates. We're going to move right into question number 5. What climate-related proposals do you support or would you initiate? On what basis would you select these? Please explain. And to start this question will be Candidate Bell.
Thank you. So I think the items I'm going to pick are items that actually passed. So there's Senate Bill 5116, and that was sort of a bill supporting Washington's clean energy economy and transitioning to a clean, affordable, reliable energy future, right? A good bill. But there are several items that were stripped out of that bill, and so I think that we need to bring those back. There's HB 2311, which is the state greenhouse emission limits and making them consistent with modern science. And then there's Senate Bill 5579, which is the bomb train. Oh, thank you. Oh, thank you. 30 seconds. Thank you. All right. So, yes, I would pursue those items that got stripped out. But more importantly, with climate change, there's an entire green economy out there if we are willing to transform our economy into it. Those are good, well-paying, non-outsourceable jobs that can lead our path to solving the larger challenge of climate change and creating a new energy economy that can benefit us for the long future. Thanks.
Candidate Lee.
Thank you. You know, I think we all should take pride in the fact that Washington State is one of the cleanest states in the nation when it comes to taking care of our environment and in climate change. And I'd love to have actually the entire world follow the Washington example. We're already doing more than our fair share, and we're showing the rest of the world how to do it. But when you've got China and India polluting the air, the water, beyond any imaginable basis, we can't do enough. But I'd like to talk about enforcing current laws and a current standard. Here in Camas, in my community, we've got a lake that is toxic. It is unsafe for people to swim in and for pets to be around. We are not enforcing current standards in our state, and all the different agencies of the government are punting. They're trying to pass off the football to the city, the county, the state. Nobody's taking responsibility for it. We need to enforce current law first and foremost.
Okay, there's just 3 questions left for this forum. We're going to move into question number 6.
Do I get to speak?
Oh, I'm sorry. I missed a candidate. I apologize for that. Please answer question 5, Candidate Rivers.
Thank you very much. So I think what we have to do, we have to be mindful of the balance. We don't necessarily, we don't have to spend a ton of money to achieve the objectives that we want to achieve. And if we decide that we want to lower CO2 emissions or have lower CO2 levels, then I think what we have to do is quantify the amount of sequestration that we're looking for. And then we have to use state right-of-way lands. We can plant plants and trees that can be harvested. We can harvest old growth trees in a very selective way and plant new trees, since we know that new trees are much better carbon sinks than old trees. We need to use local procurement. It is ridiculous that our major state agencies are purchasing things from across the United States and thereby contributing to a carbon footprint by having truck traffic. We need accelerated depreciation on energy efficient equipment so that it's attractive for business owners to purchase that energy efficient stuff and save the environment in that way. And then we need a more robust recycling program state by state. We don't have any place to...
Sorry, time, candidate Rivers. Okay, I apologize for missing you. Won't happen again. Let's go.
Don't
Question
worry.
number 6. According to the Washington State Department of Commerce, our state has about 10,000 citizens without shelter and another 11,000 in temporary homeless housing. How would you address homelessness in our state, or why would you not? For this question, we start with candidate Lee.
Thank you. Homelessness is a product of unaffordable housing. And clearly, first and foremost, we've got to get people back to work so that they have jobs and an income. But people, if they're out of work and they can't afford to pay their rent, then it sadly sets into motion a huge, horrible series of events. They spiral into drugs, alcohol, crime takes over, and a whole series of problems happen. But housing has to be affordable. That means you've got to control property taxes, first and foremost, because you cannot have affordable housing with unaffordable property taxes. Next, we've got to control building costs. And when the cost to just get a permit to build a home costs $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 for a piece of paper, that makes housing unaffordable. It rises the cost. So we've got to focus on a host of things, but in order to get housing affordable, you've got to lower the cost.
Okay. Next candidate, Rivers.
Thank you. So over the past, I think now 9 years, we've spent $13 billion on homelessness. So clearly throwing money at homelessness is not the answer. The number one industry in the 18th legislative district is the home building industry. And as someone who's tried to get a permit myself, I know how costly it is. I think that's something we can do. Additionally, I think we need to allow ADUs, or accessory dwelling units. But I think we need to go to the federal government and get a waiver that would allow co-housing. So what we would do, it'd be like a match.com, where someone who has space is paired with someone who needs space. And we then can capitalize on existing housing, but we would ask for the waiver to be able to use Section 8 dollars to do that. And I think if we can do these things and sort of look outside the box, then we'll actually move the ball forward to solve the issue of homelessness.
Candidate Bell.
So next year in Olympia is going to be a really tough year because of the budget shortfalls. And the type of things that can be on the chopping block would be cuts to the Housing Trust Fund. And for me, I would maintain the Housing Trust Fund even as budget times grow tighter and tighter. That's because housing is one of the primary social determinants of health. If you're not in stable housing, it's hard to take care of yourself when you have a chronic condition and you end up in the hospital or the ER. And then when you come out of the hospital, you go back to a terrible housing situation, you're not able to take care of yourself, and you're back in the ER in 30 days or less. So fundamentally, one of the most important reasons to focus on housing is that there are cascading effects if you don't keep people in housing. Additionally, I think there's paths that we can take where we can provide additional solutions where we try to combine healthcare, transportation, and housing, try to build communities where the total cost of living can be lower. That can be attractive and attract mixed communities, high-end, middle-income, and low-income people to live together and solve the problems together. Thank you.
Okay. Question number 7. Does the state have a responsibility to ensure that all its citizens have access to equitable, affordable health care? If so, how should it be provided? If not, what is the state's responsibility in the area of healthcare? For this question, we'll start with candidate Rivers, and to remind candidates they have 1.5 minutes to answer this question.
Thank you so much. It's been my goal to make sure that Washingtonians have excellent health care. I was chair of the Senate Healthcare Committee, and in that time, I was able to get dental for vulnerable populations and for adults, since we know that the admits to the emergency department, the #1 admit has been dental. And at a cost of $13,000 per visit, we know that it's easier to just pay for it on the front end. So to that end, I had a meeting with Vice President Pence, who shared with me how he led Indiana out of its healthcare crisis, and that was really by making sure that our rates of reimbursement for Medicaid were high enough that doctors would be induced. Unfortunately, in this past session, we sort of gave docs a little bit more, but then we hit them with a really heavy B&O tax, and we made it impossible for them to take Medicaid patients. So now we have a huge segment of population who have insurance, but they don't have a provider. So that's going to be a goal that I'm going to be working on, because I think that it takes all of us to make the system work. Additionally, telehealth has been an amazing solution for rural Washingtonians. Now we need to get the broadband out into the districts where those Washingtonians are, so that they can fully avail themselves of telehealth through the internet, be able to speak with healthcare providers without having to go into an office and get the care that they need and direction that they need from professionals.
Candidate Bell?
So to go back to the question, does the state have the responsibility? So at least at a federal level, we have to treat everybody in the emergency room at the very least. And that's due to a law introduced by Ronald Reagan called EMTALA. But emergency treatment, if you're using the emergency room as your primary care, that's the most expensive form of care possible. And so what we need to do, since we want to go beyond treating people in the emergency room, that's where we introduce the insurance system. And so then the state takes the responsibility of adding additional regulations on the insurance system so that it's more accessible to all. And so then we take care to make sure that it's accessible to people on low incomes all the way to upper incomes and with different kinds of employment arrangements. And so we have a choice, though, with insurance companies, because they haven't exactly been great stewards of our healthcare system. But insurance companies are capable of providing the innovation and the alternate payment models that would be needed to improve healthcare. However, they fail to do that. So if they continue to fail in this, we need to look forward at single payer systems, Medicare for all, and regulations that can introduce and force the innovations that are possible in the healthcare system, where we can focus on the triple aim, which is quality, patient experience, and lowering the total overall costs. My specialty has always been in healthcare technology, and I've worked on that as a startup for the last 4 years, and I love to bring that perspective to Olympia. Thank you.
Okay, Candidate Lee?
It's a great question, and I'd just like to point out that the ACA, the Affordable Care Act, has not fulfilled its promise to all the citizens across our nation and in our state. But the ultimate answer is that we're going to have to fix that broken system on a national level. What can we do here in Washington State? We obviously need to improve the efficiency of our current system. And that's first and foremost, so that healthcare dollars stretch further and deliver better quality. Another aspect that many citizens don't understand is that Washington State has roughly 55 different mandates. And that may not ring true, or what's that about? You need to understand that every single mandate adds cost to the cost of your health insurance policy. You're paying for something that you may not need or want. As an example, somebody in their 50s, 60s, or 70s has to buy an insurance policy that provides maternity control or maternity coverage. Why would they ever want to buy that? Every one of those mandates makes it more expensive and less affordable. And an easy solution ought to be giving you the choice. You, the people, buy what you need and can afford, because those mandates create a higher cost for everybody. Ultimately, we do have access for everyone, but those people show up in the emergency room, and that's the most expensive healthcare we can deliver. So we need to lower the amount of people showing up in the emergency rooms for affordable healthcare as well.
Okay, thank you, candidates. We're moving along to question 8. What role should the state play in increasing equity and fairness in K through 12 schools? For this question, we'll start with candidate Bell.
Thank you. So as the McCleary decision drives us, the funding of basic education is a responsibility of the state. And the voter-approved funding should fund additional add-ons, but the core social contract, the core part of the education that's delivered to our students who grow up to become citizens who oversee this democracy, that's a fundamental responsibility. So we have to fund that from the state level and fund that with equity. And we need to see that where disparities in school performance are associated with funding, we have to resolve those. Those are a fundamental responsibility from the state legislator, and that's where I would come from. One of the biggest challenges that to the fully funding of education, it's the cost of healthcare. And lowering the cost of healthcare is my top priority because I think it has all these additional benefits, especially to the realm of education. Thank you.
Candidate Lee.
Thank you. Over half the state budget right now is going to education, and more specifically our K-12 education. So the resources are there. What we need to find is the most efficient, effective manner to put those resources to use. And I am an absolute advocate for local control over how those resources ought to be used. Again, the parents know what is best. The local control, the local teachers, the local principals know what their community needs first and foremost. So let's put those resources and the control of those resources in their hand. But I want to tell you an absolutely amazing story. The CAM Academy in Battleground, under current funding rules, is doing absolutely amazing work for our children. Their children are scoring higher on achievement tests than almost any other school in Clark County. It's something, we've got an example, we just need to follow it. That's a lot to be proud of at the CAM Academy. Thank you. Let's follow their example.
Candidate Rivers.
Thank you. So I think that I believe that there's plenty of money in the system. We put in lots of money, but here's what happened, and this is why I have become less and less a proponent of local control. The money that we send down is called fungible, so it can be moved around within the construct of the budget that the school districts use. What this means is that LAP funding or learning assistance program funding, which is intended to help disadvantaged young people gain skills that will get them up on par with their colleagues, is often spent on other things. It's not gone. Same thing with special education. We give money for very specific causes, and then it goes to other things that may or may not have anything to do with these kids who really need it. So if we are to have equity, we need for the schools to follow the mandates of where the money should go so that the kids are actually getting the benefit from the money.
Candidate Rivers, that's time. So Before we move into closing, I want to revisit the very first question. Our friends at CVTV have informed me that they did not capture that as part of the recording. I'd hate for voters to miss out on getting that information. So bear with the technology issues. I'm going to re-ask question 1. If we can go through that question one more time so that it's in the recorded broadcast. So question 1, we know we need to attract jobs to our community, and that requires a well-educated workforce. What legislation would you suggest or support to improve Washington education, both academic and vocational? For this question, candidate Rivers was starting.
Thank you. So something caught my eye during COVID-19, and that is that we had significant gaps in the areas of employment that were very, very important. There were gaps in healthcare, there were gaps in transportation, and certainly gaps in trucking, of all things. So I think what we need to do is survey and find more of those gaps, and then we need to focus on those. I have a great record with career and technical education, and so I know that we have the ability to do that. We have online schooling options that can be used. But I know from firsthand experience with a business in my district who said we wanted to expand here, but we didn't have the people. I was able to connect them with Mel Netzhammer at WSU, and they were able to develop a program that would make sure business expansion happened right here in the 18th because they had a workforce. So it's about bringing all the people together, defining what you need, and then bringing all the people together who can make that happen. And I think that that's a model that will work and that will help us create jobs right here at home.
Okay, thank you for repeating that question. Candidate Bell?
I would focus on universal pre-K. So high quality early childhood education helps children avoid going into special education, grade repetition, early parenthood, incarceration, all down the line. For every dollar that you spend on early childhood education, studies show that you can receive $7 to $12 back in terms of other avoided costs. Beyond that, I'm not sure about the premise of the question. I think that what attracts a workforce are the cost of housing and the cost of healthcare. And so I think those are stronger. If we can keep those costs lower in this area of the state, that can be a stronger attractor to bring in workers. And as a startup founder, I know that a lot of technology folks would really benefit and really be attracted to, as young parents, to early childhood education and universal pre-K in this state. So that's where I would focus.
Thank you, Candidate Bell. Next, Candidate Lee.
I believe two people know what is best for a child's education, and that's the child's parents. Let's let mom and dads decide what their children need in terms of improving the quality of their education. And that means local control, because one size does not fit all. We do not need a top-down solution for our children's education, especially if we want to improve the quality of our children's education. And that's what moms and dads and families care about most, the quality of their children's education. We must deliver an accountability system that delivers results. It is the children who need to perform better and have the teachers and the resources directed to them. Finally, I'd just like to say my opponent's McCleary-based solution has failed, and I will work to correct that. We can learn from something here in Washington State. Read General John Stanford's amazing book. He turned around the Seattle school system in a decade, took it from worst to first. Thank you.
Thank you, candidates, for repeating your answers for question 1. That concludes all of our questions. So we have now 1 minute each for a closing statement. For these closing statements, we start first with Candidate Lee.
Hi, I'd like to thank the good folks at the League of Women Voters, as well as CVTV, for providing this opportunity for me to get in front of the citizens of LD 18. And I'd like to thank the citizens of LED 18 for tuning in. You know, sometimes politicians stay too long. Instead of being in touch with the people they're supposed to represent, too many of the special interests and bureaucrats get their attention. I'm going to Olympia, if the people choose me, to fight for the people and their concerns. That means jobs, that means lowering their taxes, that means fighting for things that they can care about and delivers the best results for them. We've got to lower the cost of providing jobs for our business creators. And there are so many things that people want us to do as their representatives. So to learn more about my battle for the people of the 18th District, I encourage you to go to electjohnlee.com. Remember, Lee is the key.
Candidate Rivers, closing statement.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you for holding this forum this evening. You know, it's easy to shake your fist in the air and complain about all of the things that are going wrong. I think it takes a different kind of human being to roll up their sleeves and say, I want to be a part of that solution. I've been that for the people of the 18th District for the past 2 terms as senator. Additionally, I think that we are in a very uncertain time, and it's important to have the experience and the leadership of someone who's been there before, has helped to solve the problems, and knows what to do this time around. I'd be deeply honored to earn your vote for me, to keep me working for you as your senator in the 18th Legislative District.
Thank you, Candidate Rivers. And Candidate Bell.
Yeah, I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters for this forum. It's been a wonderful opportunity to interact with the other candidates and to interact with you. Make no mistake, next year in Olympia will be a challenge. At this point, we don't know the full economic impact of the virus. We don't know what the federal government will do with funding for state and local governments. But I know that there will be a fight about what our priorities are. And those priorities will be a statement about what we are as a people. For me, my priorities are to put people first. The Federal Reserve has made $4 trillion available to the capital markets. So any reasonable business can borrow to get through these times. Businesses will be okay. But if we recklessly cut social services, we will create deeper social problems with longer-term effects. As an entrepreneur and an owner of a successful small business, I have to innovate every day. I have to do more with less money to survive. I can bring that perspective to the legislature so that our resources are spent wisely and effectively, and we're better set for the future. Thank you.
Sincere thanks to the candidates for their participation in this Zoom candidate forum, our very first. We appreciate your time. Again, this is on cvtv.org. And I believe we can go ahead and move right in to the next session. Thank you, candidates, for participating.